Hello and welcome. Let's look at how to create the instrument you just heard, using only stock plugins in Ableton Live 12. If you want to recreate this, you are going to need the following instruments and effects. Electric, which is the source instrument. We'll also look at Vital later on. The effects: envelope follower, auto filter, erosion, cabinet, auto pan, 2 LFOs, vocoder, 2 glue compressors, grain delay, hybrid reverb, and an EQ8. So this is the instrument in its entirety. I'm just going to turn the effects off for now, and we're going to start with the electric, which in Ableton Live is a stock plugin that emulates electric keyboard / organ kind of thing. You can search for this using Control F or Command F if you're on Windows or Mac, respectively. So all I've done with this plugin is I've gone through and I've edited a few values, just shaping it to how I wanted it to sound. This is where I would suggest you spend some time. Fine-tuning the sound to how you would want it to be. But don't rush this process. Have fun with it. See what kind of sounds you can come up with. Next, let's start looking at the effects. The things that really start to make the sound what it is. First of all, I have an envelope follower, an auto filter, and an erosion. Now, if I just turn everything off and have the envelope follower turned on, as you can hear, the sound hasn't changed at all. But as you can see in this window here, it's showing the input sound. Now I have moved the gain to 6 decibels because I found this was the best place for it to really start affecting the auto filter and the erosion. If we click on this button and move to this window here, I've attached the envelope follower to the auto filter frequency and the erosion amount. If I turn on the auto filter, you can hear the effect that it's having. I've set the frequency range of the envelope follower from 38% to 100%, because I found if I set this all the way from 0, it was just taking too much away from the sound. Something to consider when you're making your own. In the auto filter, the only thing I changed was the resonance to 16%, the filter slope to 12, the filter type to MS2, and added 5.71 decibels of drive. I've also applied the envelope follower to the erosion. This is just to add a little bit of top end noise back in. The envelope follower is attached to the amount of erosion, and I've set this from 0 to 74%. I found going to 100% it was adding too much noise. As you can hear, it's adding a little bit of noise to the top now. Again, you can experiment with different values by moving the frequency and changing the width as well. Next up, I've added a cabinet. This is to emulate a speaker. I'm using a 2x12, a condenser, an output dual, and if I mix this in over time, you can hear what it adds to the sound. This is just there to make it sound like it's running through a physical speaker, and to take away a little bit more of the top end as well. Makes it sound more natural and real. Up next we have an auto pan. This is to give it that Wurlitzer style sound. As you can see, over a specified rate, it's moving between left and right. And what I did is I applied an LFO to the rate and set the value between 43% and 68%. I didn't want this rate to have an unreasonably wide movement. I set the waveform in LFO to random, smoothed out the stepping a little bit, and set the rate to 0.46 Hz, so this LFO wasn't changing too quickly either. Next up we have a vocoder with an LFO affecting a few specific parameters. Now this probably took the longest to set up, and I would recommend that you sit down and play with the vocoder, looking at all the different parameters and how they will affect the sound. But a quick rundown for this. I set the carrier to enhance and the input from external, with the audio coming from the electric organ that we have playing the sound, and made sure that it was before all of the effects. If I turn this all the way off and introduce it over time, you can hear the effect that it's adding, but having that mix of dry and wet allows a little bit more movement in the sound. If I turn the LFO on and move to this page, you can see that I've applied the LFO to the low filter range, the upper filter range, and the formant shift amount. I've set it with these values: low filter 24% to 36%, upper filter 54% to 77%, and the formant shift range 46% to 55%. This gives it a little bit of extra movement. Kept the LFO as a sine wave and added a tiny amount of jitter, and then set the rate to 0.28 Hz. Again, just to give it a little bit of more randomized movement. After this series of effects, I added a glue compressor with the soft clip turned on, pulling down the threshold to -23.8 decibels and bringing the makeup gain to 12.1 decibels. This is just to balance out the overall leveling of the sound. And give it a small amount of saturation as well, as you can hear from the soft clipping. Next we have the grain delay, and this is a really fun delay plugin. I would recommend that you really get to grips with it. But a few settings that I've set up with this, I wanted it to move across the pitches as it was giving delay. So I set the pitch to 12, which is an octave, because it works in semitones. I brought the frequency all the way down to 1 Hz and set the spray to 22.2 milliseconds. Now these three on their own, I would recommend that you just have some fun with, play around with them, see what happens. I set the feedback to 23% and the dry wet to 10%, and I got this kind of sound. Turning that dry wet up, you can really hear it start to affect the sound more. But I just kept this down around 10%, because when we get to the hybrid reverb, you'll really hear that this really affects the sound a lot. Next, I added another delay. I set this to ping pong so it moves between the left and the right. I turned on the filter and made sure it was pretty much sitting in the high mids and the highs, setting the dry wet to 43%. Again, this is just to add a little bit more movement and to accentuate what's happening with the grain delay. Next we have the hybrid reverb, and this is where a lot of the sound starts to come together and really be shaped. I'm not going to explain too much about all of the settings in hybrid reverb. Basically it's a convolution reverb that can be used in parallel with more of a sort of standardized reverb that you would find in Ableton Live or other DAWs that you have. The main thing that I did do with this is I kept it in parallel. I made sure the convolution IR was Hall's long synth Hall because I wanted it to have that really long sound. I set the algorithm to shimmer and blended between the convolution and the algorithm reverb 29 to 71. The decay on the shimmer at 3.86 seconds. With the EQ, I made sure that I pretty much high passed all of the lows so it wasn't rumbling too much. I gave it 127% stereo and monoed that bass even more, and then set the dry wet to 40%. Now when we listen to this, this is where it gets really cool, because by itself it almost sounds completely church organ style, but then mixing between the two, you get that combination of the electric keys and the organ reverb. And as you can hear, that grain delay from earlier is really affecting the sound. If I set the dry wet to 100%, you'll really hear it accentuated. After this, I applied an EQ8 with just a tiny amount of mid scoop, just to control the mids a little bit more. And then I added a glue compressor at the end, again with soft clip turned on, which acts as sort of a limiter. Basically stops a signal going above 0 decibels, and set the makeup gain to 7.14 decibels. So that in a nutshell is how I made this sound. But as I said at the beginning of this video, You can also use different instruments. And in this case, I'm going to use Vital as well. So I'm going to turn the electric off. I've just set up 2 chains, one with the electric and one with Vital. I'm going to turn that on. In Vital, I'm just using a sawtooth, nothing special. The only thing I've added is some velocity control on the level. But when we play this back, you can really hear how these effects are changing the sound. Here's what it sounds like before the effects. And then with the effects added. So the reason why I'm showing you that, don't just think that you have to use electric specifically. Think of these effects that are added extra that you can use with an underlying synth. So any synth of choice, be it Serum, Vital, or anything else, phase plant, stock plugins that you have. The instrument and the effects combined are going to give you some really interesting sounds to play with. Now the main thesis I want you to take away from this video is just basically to play and have fun and see what you can achieve with completely stock plugins. And obviously with Vital, another free plugin. If you have a DAW, you don't have to think in this day and age that you have to go and buy all of these extra third-party plugins to get a good sound. Gone are those days. So if you have Ableton Live, FL Studio, Cubase, Logic, Pro Tools, Reason, Bitwig, whatever DAW you have, just explore all of the different tools that they have, all of the different stock plugins, and see what you can come up with. Obviously in this video I've showcased things in Ableton Live, but that doesn't mean you can't do something possibly similar or even completely different in something like FL Studio or Cubase. Remember, music making should be fun, and it should be a way to explore your creativity, to see what different avenues and paths you can go down. See what happens when you add 2 different plugins together. See if you get any happy accidents. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. I hope you found the information in it useful. And as always, until next time, God bless and goodbye.